One of the things that we want to cover today is how to write queries, write SQL queries using that link query syntax. We've done the methods, but we want to go a little bit over the query syntax specifically because that's currently the best way to do joins, is using the query syntax. We'll also look at navigation properties. That's a big important thing as far as now we have multiple tables. We want to be able to get the data from all those tables. So navigation properties are a big key to that. Okay. Prior to that, we just had a products table, so we didn't really care about navigating between things. But the thing is going to be, now that we have foreign keys and you've got some familiarity with it, every time we have a foreign key, we'll have a navigation property on both sides of that. That will allow us to kind of go back and forth relatively easy. We'll talk a little bit about what's called lazy loading versus eager loading. We need to talk about that as far as navigation properties goes. We want to look at storing tags because there's a few different ways to do that. And then how do we implement a search, right? So now we say we want to search by that tag. Okay, so that's a good thing to know. Okay, as well as, again, kind of looking at carousels of photos. I've had you do that a little bit on the labs, but we haven't talked about it too much. So I want to go over that specifically. And then, again, keyword search kind of thing. So we'll look at search boxes, we'll look at navigation properties, and we'll look a little bit about the link query syntax. All of this really has to do in large part of, okay, how do I deal with multiple tables? Right? How do I deal with a database that actually has more than one table? Okay, so I want to go through a few different things on the SportsStore, but there's enough things I need to cover today. I am going to record this, so I'd ask you to follow along on the recording, not to follow along in class, just because I need to make sure we get everything done today and it doesn't trickle into tomorrow, so that you have tomorrow for lab time. So I'm going to ask that you take notes, but not to go along. You can go along with the video, and if there's anything there, I'll kind of follow up with that, should anything get missed in that process. But I just have enough things that I need to get through today. So let's talk about tags first. So there's a few different options for how to store tags. So general purpose of tags is to kind of give you some better searching capabilities on whatever website you're working with, right? So let's say I want to search for this and that. Well, categories is usually refined, and it's only, well, this product or this thing can usually be only part of one category. That's not a hard and fast rule, but usually things can only be part of one category, and then you get these kind of, well, usually very deep categorization structures, right? Which turns out can make it hard to kind of find things. The other way to organize things is to throw tags on each of the items that you're going to be searching. So in this case, we'll throw tags on our products, right? And the main purpose, again, for that is SEO. It's search engine optimization. We want to make it easier for users to find that product they're looking for, okay? And part of where that comes up, for one, is that, well, sometimes the word that you're searching for, right, it might not be in the product description, and it might not be in the name of the product. So if we just went off of those, there might be some products that slip out of your ability to find, because it's not included in either the name or the description of the product. Okay, so that's one thing that happens. Okay, now what are some different ways that we can store those tags? What are some different ways that we can store those tags? So let's say I've got my products here. So I've got a products table. Okay. Somebody give me one option, because there's at least 3 ways I can do this. Where could I store those tags?
in another table that uses a foreign key to relate it to the products table.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and throw 3 products up here, products table up here, because I want to just make sure we have all 3 approaches kind of in view. So you say it's got some foreign key to another table.
Yeah.
Okay. So what columns does that other table have?
Well, it would absolutely need a primary key for each row of the tags table, and then a form key for the product ID of the product it's for,
Okay.
and then another
So
column for the text of the tag.
We'll call it tag ID, we'll call it product ID, and we'll call it tag text or tag name. Okay, well, what do I want to call that table? What would be a sensible thing to call that table? Huh?
Tags.
Tags? Okay, so let's say we call that tags. Okay. Graham, you had a hand up?
Yeah, but I don't think it would be a smart idea.
Okay, well, but what is it?
It would be to like put them all into one field, but they with separated commas.
Yes, yes. That's a valid option. Put into one field and separate it by commas. Okay? That's one option. Okay? So that puts it all in here. I could also put it out here as a separate table. Okay? Now, what if I want to say on the website that only these 10 tags are allowed? Right? What if I want to constrain the tags that are allowed?
You could then have another table that has every possible tag that can be used, and then you can have an intermediate table between products and tags, so you can have a many-to-many relationship.
Right, so I could put a tags table down here,
That's like not meant.
and this is why I'm asking what columns go in here, because there's 2 different approaches. So let's say I have the tag ID here and tag name, and yeah, so I need a bridge between those 2, right? So what would be a sensible name of that bridge table?
Product tags.
Product tags, okay? So product tags. Okay, so Dalton, what columns do I need to put in that table?
Tag ID.
Okay. And
Product ID.
okay. I usually put them in the same order that I have the name in the table. So I'm going to put them in that product ID first, tag ID second. That's not a hard and fast rule that you have to do it. I just find it more readable if I keep it in the same order. So if I said tag product, I would have done tag and then product. So we've got many-to-many there, and we've got many-to-many there, right? So all 3 of those options work. All 3 of those options are valid ways to store tags, okay? These are all valid options. So starting from the left, okay? Let's say we take this approach. What's one downside to this approach?
You can only have so many tags.
Right. Why can I only have so many tags?
Because you can give the limit, like the amount of space you can put in that
What's the data type probably here?
Bar chart. So isn't this supposed to be bar chart?
Yeah. So let's say I make this varchar. I have to give that a length, don't I? I have to give that some sort of length, right? Well, but that length is in characters. It's not in the number of tags, right? So I can specify, I have to specify a length. By specifying length, I'm limiting how many tags I can put in there, but I'm also not limiting it by how many tags I can put in there, right? That could be 5, that could be 20, all depends on how long the tags are, right?
So couldn't it be a waste of resources to have like have it say like you can have 100 characters, but then you might only end up using 10 of them?
Yeah, it could be. It could be. That's not so much a concern with 100 characters, but if you said 4,000 characters,
Yeah.
right, to handle lots of tags, well, then that becomes a problem, right? So for sure, this imposes a limit on the number of tags you can attach to an item. That's not necessarily a bad thing, okay? There is an upper limit to how many tags are valuable to have on an item. So that's okay. But the question is, where is the happy medium? Okay? There's also also another piece in here, right? Well, with the other two, I can do joins, right? I can join on the tag name, or I can find products with a similar tag, right? So let's say I have either of these, I can look for all the products that have a tag of computers, say computers and programming, right? That comes out pretty naturally with these. Does that make sense? I can do a join and find that relatively naturally. Okay? So there's that. What about these two? What's the difference here? There's a few important differences that matter there between those two options.
I'd probably say one is in order to get the tags associated with in order to list the tags associated with a product on the third option, you would need to do a second join because
Okay.
they're not directly stored in the products table.
So in this case, yes, I would need to do 2 joins here. I would need to do 2 joins in that case. So that could make any search, any querying that I do more expensive. Okay, so that's one side. But if that was the only reason, then I'd always choose this one, right? So there's got to be more to it, to the story.
Maybe if you wanted to add something to product tags that tags doesn't have.
Okay, so I could add some data down here.
Yeah.
So say like the computer tag also means there's some additional data with it.
There's better separation of concerns because if something goes wrong with one of the tables, it doesn't affect the others.
I wouldn't really go for that.
Okay, yeah.
What is it? So I said something before we drew the second one. What was it? It was, in this one, I can't really limit the tags that the user can enter, right? In this one, the user can enter any tag that they want, right? At least in theory, right? So I could end up with, let's say, computers and computer and compute and all these different tags. Maybe I don't want to support all these different variants, or maybe I don't want to support an uppercase version of computers and a lowercase version of computers as a separate tag, right? But all of that is allowed here, right? You can enter anything you want with any casing you want. There's no really validation and restrictions on the tag names. right? If I do this, does that limit limit what you can enter, potentially?
Yeah.
Okay. Why does it limit what you can enter?
Because you can't add a tag to product that doesn't exist in the tags table.
Under what assumption? Because you're making an assumption there. It's a likely assumption, but there's assumption there. Why might that be true that they're now limited on what tags they can add to a product? What if anybody on your website can change this table? If anybody on your website can change the tags table, does that limit anybody from adding a new tag?
It doesn't.
It doesn't, right? So you're making the assumption that this is only accessible to admins, right? Which isn't necessarily defined by that structure, right? I haven't said who can access which table. So it allows me to put that enforcement in, right? I can, with this structure, say, well, only admins can change this table and nobody else can, right? I can't do that here, but it doesn't require me to, right? You could say, still go edit the product and put in a new tag name, and my code that saves that product could just say, oh, that tag doesn't exist. I'll go create it for you, right? I could write my code in such a way that when you save the product, it saves any new tags that you added, right? Does that make sense? So the main reason I would do one or the other, here I have an admin that's now controlling the tags and limiting what tags can be entered, right? But what does that mean for the downside though? That means I have to have an admin there, right? Now I have to have an admin that's actively working to maintain this table. And I have to give them a UI to do it. Does that make sense? If I add this other table, somebody now has to administer it. Somebody has to have access to it. And somebody has to take the support requests when there's a tag missing from the tags table that should be there, right? So does this add a cost to maintaining the database? It does, right? So adding this means that there's somebody who now has a job that they have to do, and maybe more than one person. But it does mean for better data, because, okay, so now you can't just enter any tag you want, but now somebody has to administrate that tag. Now, one thing I can do here, okay? We talked about the cost. You mentioned the cost of there's a second join that I have to do, right? There's a second join I have to do. Is it possible in this structure for me to eliminate that second join?
If you're only selected in the tags associated with a certain product, you could just select from the product tags table and not have to select. If you're not interested in getting, say, the name of the product, you just want to know all of the tags associated with it.
What if I make the tag name the primary key, rather than having some arbitrary tag ID?
It would prevent duplicates.
But that's desirable, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Right, I wouldn't want to have the computer's tag in there more than once. So it's actually a plus, right? That's not a downside. So I could just change this tags table to just have one column and it'd be the tag name. So that all that's in there, these names are valid. Okay? Which then lets me move up here and say, well, I've got a foreign key between here and here. Now I've got a copy of the tag name up there. And I don't have to do that second join. I only need to look at this table now anytime somebody edits a product to make sure that the tags that they've entered are valid. I don't have to look it up when I'm showing search results. That makes sense? Because my tag name's here. So these have much similar performance when you're searching for products. That makes sense?
So how come you don't need the tag ID? Like, how does it work with just tag?
So I'm going to make the tag name a string. Okay. So a primary key. What are the rules about a primary key? It has to be unique. It has to not be null. And it can't be changed. Okay. Those are the 3 rules about a primary key. Right. So in those 3 rules, is that required to be an integer?
No.
No, it doesn't, right? Even if it's just a string, it still can be unique. It still can be not null. It still can be something that we can't change. So I can't actually use a varchar or a char as a primary key. Does that make sense? That's actually allowed. Okay, and it's useful, right? It's useful. In this case, that is very useful to make my primary key a varchar instead of having that arbitrary integer. Okay. It actually also makes transferring data over easier, right? Because now I don't care about those arbitrary numbers, which never really mattered in the first place. What really mattered in the first place was the name of the tag. So I can structure those 3 ways, okay? The one I want to go through specifically is this one on the left, okay? Because there's a lot of value actually to doing it this way. The downside of doing it this way is it means that most of my logic happens in C# instead of SQL. That makes sense? A lot of my logic ends up having to be, if I do this, a lot of my logic will have to move into C#. Whereas I can do a lot of logic over on these 2, I can do that on the SQL side. So let's see, how would I do that from this side? The other upside, actually one big upside about doing the first option rather than the other 2 is it makes editing products super easy, relatively speaking. Because if I have to have that second table, working with and manipulating that second table means quite a bit more work that I have to do on my edit screen. Versus if you think about how you want the user to enter it, I really want them to enter in a single text box with commas regardless of what structure they give me, right? Regardless of what the database structure is on the back end. Really, that's the ideal way, and that's how most websites set it up, right? There's a little text box. YouTube's the same way, and you put in all the things separated by commas, right? So if I walk through that, so the first thing I obviously need to do is update the schema. So I'm going to go to the products table, and I'm going to add a column to store the tags. So tags, varchar, and I'm going to say maybe 100 characters. I'm going to allow that to be null, mainly because it doesn't exist yet. One important thing to know, let's say I add a column like this and I mark it not null, right? You can't add, one thing to know, once there's data in a table, you can't typically add a column that's marked not null. Because not null means there's got to be data in it. But when initially you add a column, right, it'll be null. Everything there will be null. So if I don't allow null initially, it will get me an error when I try to publish this. Because initially there'll be nulls all over there. So Either way, it's fine. Tags aren't not really required, but that's one thing to remember anytime you're adding a new column. At least initially in that process, you're going to have to allow nulls in there because there will be nulls initially. Okay. So I'm going to publish that. So I've made a change to the schema. What's the next thing I need to do? Anytime I make a change to the schema, I need to update.
Executed. Quest.
Oh. One thing it's told me, oh, okay. It's going to drop the photos column. So it gave me an error. I'm going to tell it go ahead and go through because I don't have the photos column right now. Jeremy, you had a question up?
Oh, I was going to say, who should execute it and then maybe change the model?
Change the model, right? So once I've made a change to the schema, I always need to go and make a corresponding change to the model. Okay? That's right. So I'm going to go over to the product. At the end of this, I'm going to add that post public string tags. Are there any annotations, any attributes I should add to this?
You set a limit on how many characters you can have.
Mm-hmm.
Above.
So how do I do that? How do I set that limit?
String length.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say string length 100 because that's the number I put over here. So I said it was 100 on the database side. I need to say it's 100 over here. I'm not going to mark it required because it's allowing null. Okay. So product, that's updated there. Okay, so now I have that field for it. What would be in the next sensible step? So I've got a column to store the tags, but I've got no data in it. What should I probably fix next?
You should add the ability for someone to be able to add tags or edit it.
Right? So I've got two options, right? I can either put in the code to show the tags, or I can put in the code to edit the tags, right? Probably makes more sense to edit the tags first so that then I have something that I can show. Although I could just put in data into the database directly and put that there, but I'm going to start by updating that screen so we can edit them. So if you remember right, we put this on the admin controller. Okay, so I'm going to go to admin edit. Okay. We'll add another field down here. For the tags. Let's try to run this just to make sure everything's working right now. So, one thing I noticed for sure, if I wanted to add the tags, if I wanted to see the tags here, note that they're not there. So I may at some point want to add it to here. For this edit screen, it's probably fine that the tags don't show here. I'm going to go to, let's say, Bling Bling King. And now I've got my tags box here, right? So, Bling Gold King. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Is that going to work? Show of hands, who thinks that that's not going to work? Okay, so from those people who think it's not going to work, Eston, why do you think it's not going to work?
Alex and Jeremy are the pretty smartest dudes in the room, so I just
Dalton.
I did not raise my hand.
Oh, sorry.
I just think it's not gonna work because you asked, but I'm not sure why it's not going to work.
Graham.
Because you didn't actually add anything in the control, or?
I didn't change anything in the controller, okay? I didn't change anything in the controller. So if I say save this, I'm going to come back in here and it's going to be blank because I haven't actually saved the value. So if I make a change on the controller, you got to remember that you still got to go, sorry, if I make a change on the view, I still got to make a corresponding change on the controller. So generally speaking, anytime you add some new data, right, we're going to have to change the view. I mean, we're going to have to change the model, the view, and the controller. It's unfortunately that usually we have to change all three sides just to add a column. So, product.tags. Problem solved, right? So I just need to make sure I'm saving it. When I do an edit, I need to save it. Is there anything I need to do for the create?
There is not.
Why not?
Because when you submit it, it creates a product object that you add to the database.
Okay. I don't have to do anything because I'm taking this model in. This is model I'm taking in, so it's accepting tags and just adding it there, right? If I had a view model here instead of a model, then I need to make sure to copy that value from the view model to the model. Does that make sense? So because I'm using the model and I'm not saying new product, right? If I'd said new product here, then I'd have to copy all the values one by one, right? I'm just reusing that object that comes in. Okay, so let's go create this. Let's go run this now, the new code. So I'm going to go to admin. Oh, and that was not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to delete it. I wanted to edit. So I'm going to save that. And that time it worked. Okay. So we've set it up so we can edit it. We can edit the tags and go back to here, but we don't have the tags being displayed yet, right? So let's go back into here. So that's on the product controller. Now looking here, is there anything more I have to do to bring in the tags? Recognize I'm bringing in the entire product object, right? I'm bringing the entire product object, so this doesn't have to change. With this approach, this doesn't have to change, okay? Now if I'd taken one of the other two approaches, do I have to do something here?
Yes.
What do I have to do there?
You would need to have to join in the tags.
So I'd need to join in the tags on the controller side if I did something different there. Okay. So let's go to the view. Let's add those tags. So product I need to go to product summary. So under product summary, we've got, I want to put it at the end, roughly. So let's say I'm going to put in model.tags. I'm going to give this a class, a badge. Maybe badge primary. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. So I've got the data there. I've got this one showing up correctly as bling gold king, but I want to break those up into multiple tags. Okay. So what can I use to break this up into multiple tags?
For each.
Okay, I can do for each. Over what?
Model.tags.
On what?
Model.tags.
Okay, so let's try this. Okay. So for each.
Oh,
Yes.
you're gonna have to,
We have to do
split the
something.
tags.
Yes. So let me just show this real quick because it's worth seeing. So if I just say for each over tags, tags is what type? It's a string, right? A string does implement IEnumerable, which means I can for each over it, right? But each of these things I get here will be what? They're not going to be a tag, they're going to be,
One solid string.
they're going to be, well, let's look at it. So I'm going to save this. Yeah?
Each character.
Each character, right? Now I have one problem there. Say loop over tags. It's telling me that tags is null. Remember, not every object has a tag. I haven't set tags on every row. So what do we need to do to fix that problem so it doesn't crash? You need to set me. Okay. So if model tags does not equal null, then I can do all that logic. Okay, so if the model tag is not null, then we'll run it. Okay. You can see all the little badges, one badge for every single character, right? So I can do a for each over tags, but it doesn't give me what I want, right? So, and you're right in saying that I need to split it. So I need to split it on the commas. So I'm going to tell it split, and I need to tell it to split it on commas.
I think you need one more parenthesis.
Yeah, I do. Because one's for the method call and one's for the for. Okay. So split it on commas. All good. Now, let me show you something very interesting. Okay, I'm going to go to admin again. Say corner flags. And put a bunch of commas in there. So, this is what I get. Hi, comma, 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 hello. I probably just want it to say hi and hello. Okay. Somebody give me a tool to fix that.
Isn't there something you could use to get rid of white space in a string?
Okay. Such as?
String is not null or empty.
Oh.
Or white space, I don't remember.
Okay.
What it was.
Null or white space. So where would I put that?
Create, could you create an if statement around the div, or you could use ternary, maybe?
So I could put another if statement in there, yes. And that's maybe one possibility. The thing to know, and this is a good tool to have up your belt. String split has some overloads, and it has a very useful one. So let me say go to definition here. So there is this one that just takes a series of separators, which is what I'm currently using, but there's also this very helpful one right here. Okay, so first it takes an array of separators, and then it takes this options thing, which is a num value. This is usually the one you want to use anytime you're working with split. So I'm going to say car array because in order to use the other one, it has to know that's an array of characters. And then I'm going to say string split options dot remove empty entries. And I think that I might need to do one more thing. Okay. So what that will do is it would remove any empty strings that are there. Now, I don't think that will work in my particular case. Yeah, it won't work in my particular case, so let me go to admin and let me make another one. What was the third one? Human chessboard is the third one. So human chessboard, because when I wrote that first one, I put a space between each of the commas, which meant that that didn't work. So hello world, no spaces between the commas. There we go. Okay. So that's fine. This one isn't, right? So that string split, remove the empty options, works as long as there's not spaces also there. It works as long as it's just commas all smashed together, not comma space, comma space, comma space, comma space. Right? Now, one option I have, let's say I do this. I say I'm going to treat commas or spaces as separators. Would that work?
It would, but then you couldn't include spaces in tags.
Right. Right. Because then spaces and tags would be treated as separators. Right? Okay. So that's a useful tool, but you're right, it doesn't necessarily fix all the problems. So yes, another way to do this is to say if the tag if the tag only consists of white space characters, then don't show it. So I need to say if it's not null or white space, then show the tag. Right? So I may need to do that just to be more robust. And that solves both of those cases. Okay. So I can do that just fine, right? So I can handle, hey, have the user just enter it as a single box, keep it as a single column. That's all perfectly valid. So I can edit it and I can show it that way. Okay. And so I'm using split to split it based on commas. All right. Is there anything more I need to do with, does anybody have a question with that at this point? Does that make sense to everybody? To kind of do that way? Okay. So now I've got that in there. A next logical step for me to do would be to put in some sort of search box so I can search for something based on that tag. Right? That'd be the next logical step. Okay. So where do you think I'm going to start that process? Where's a good place to start that process? I want to have a search box up here on top of the page that I can search with. What file should I start with?
Layout,
With the layout?
like making the text box in the top bar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why did you start out with the model? Or, no, controller? No.
So I can start it a few different ways. Yeah, you're right. I could start with the model. I could start with controller. I could start with the model, the controller, the view, or the layout, right? Now, difference between view and layout, right? If I put it in the layout, remember, now it's on every page, right? So what if I just want it on the product list page? Okay, then I need to put it in the view, which is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to put it in the view. I'm not actually going to put it in the layout, okay? So just by a show of hands, between those three options, what do people think? Should I start with the model? Show of hands. So I've got 2. Okay, what about the controller? Nobody for the controller. What about the view? Okay. So for the 3 of you that are for the view, what's the upside of me starting with the view?
Well, I feel like by creating the visual aspect, you can see better what needs to get passed into the controller.
I think there's some value to that. I think there's some value to that. Normally I would say, yes, let's start with the model, but there's some sense here, this is more visually oriented. I do need to kind of figure out what needs to be there. So yeah, let's start. I'm going to actually start with the view. But you could start with the model. It's a legitimate option. Okay. The one problem, though, with starting with the model, so let's look at our controller, product controller. Model would imply some inputs. Does this product list take a model? It doesn't, right? It doesn't. So where's the model that I would need to change? Have a search box. I don't have one, right? What it returns is a list of products, or this product list view model, right? Well, I guess I could maybe do something there. I could maybe add something to that model. But notice that there's not a model being passed in. Okay, so let's look at the view, and let's see what I can do here with the view. So product list. So I've got up here, this would be before the list of products, right? So let's say I know I need to have some sort of form, right? Because if I want to do searching, I probably need a form there, more than likely. It's not just going to be a link. So I'm going to say using begin form, and this is going to post back to the same place. So let's start there. Okay, so probably want a search box of some sort, right? Now, using Bootstrap, okay, one thing that's commonly used for a search box is something called an input group. So bootstrap for so I could just put a text box there, but the nice thing about input groups is it allows me, I can't tell, and it's kind of hard to see probably from your end. How much that helps. But if you're looking at input group on the Bootstrap website, what it allows me to do, it allows me to put buttons and controls both before and after the input box, which is nice because then I can tack my search button onto the end of it. Does that make sense? So I'm going to put my little search button at the end. So in order to do that, I need the outer layer to be an input group. So div class input group. Okay. What controls do I need here? I need HTML dot, well, I want a text box, right? So let's say I start with just text box, not text box 4, because I haven't done anything with the model. And give this a name of Q. Okay. I also need that submit button. So button type submit. So let's say I just start with this. I'm going to have to do a little bit more with Bootstrap. Get there in a minute. So just starting here, that's how it's going to look, just connected like that. I want them to actually be Bootstrap styled. So for the one in the middle, for the text box, I need to mark that as form control. No. Or maybe just keep this simple. And go back to here and just use some raw HTML. So type type text. It's going to be name Q, form control, and what other tag do I need to add to the end? So on the end, this is that one. So I believe I need append. There we go. So div class input group append. So anything I want to be at the end of the box needs to go in this group append. So I'm going to say slash div, close that off. You kind of see here, okay, the search bar looks fine. The search button is still not really styled because I haven't added the classes I need to it yet. So let's say class BTN primary. That would look like that. A lot of times though, for buttons at the end of this like there, we'll use the outline style. So I might say BTN outline primary, which will kind of look like that. Okay. I might want to add a little font awesome icon in there. Grab my little search glass, use that. And I'm going to mark that FA-FW. So it's got a fixed width. Okay, there we go. So I have my search box. Okay. So that's the key that we usually use. Anytime you got a search box, knowing about that input group. Input groups are a great thing to kind of put controls like that together. Take up a little less space. Okay. So I'm going to use that input group. If I type in, let's say I type in hi, or hello, because that's in two of my things. Well, right now it's not doing anything, right? Right now it's not doing anything. It just kind of goes away, right? In fact, I can't even see, there's not even something in the URL that says what I typed in, right? I can't see in the URL what I typed in. So where did that value go?
Nowhere, you just threw it away.
I sent it to the server. I sent it to the server ignored it, but I sent it to the server, right? So remember that there's two ways to send data, to send things to the server, right? What are those two ways? Okay.
Well, I was just gonna say it sent it to whatever page you're on,
Okay.
because you don't have actually directing to any route or whatever.
Okay, and that's fine. That's actually what I want. So one useful tool. Yeah, remember I can go into Developer Tools. Okay, in Developer Tools, there's this little section called Network. Okay, Network shows you what you've sent to the server and how you've sent it. Okay, so if I open up the Network tab, say hello, hit search, you'll see that it does a lot of looking up here. Where is the, but up at the top there. So there's the request it sent to the server. So we can see it requested this page. Notice what the method is. The method is post, right? We can send things as get or we can send things as post. What's the difference between get and post?
Get sends a request to the server. Wait, no. Get is a request to the server to get the view, and then a post is sending information from the view to the server.
No.
So in get, you're using your data in the URL, and then post you're sending data behind the, kind of behind the scenes, like
Yes.
as
So-
like data.
Yeah. So in both cases, and this where I was saying it's not really true, in both cases we're sending data to the server. In both cases we're going to the server, it's going to the controller, that's generating a view, and it's coming back. Okay. One of the rules with get is you can only use that when you're looking for data, when you're not manipulating data. But if you're changing data, you have to use post. You want to use post, right? So in this case, we're searching, right? We're not manipulating data. So we really should use get. And you're right, if I send something as a GET request, all those parameters that I have in my form are going to be in that URL. If I send it as POST, they go in the POST data, or the body. And in fact, if I look in this network tab so I can see it's POST, I can also at the bottom of this see all the form data that's sent. So I can see Q hello. So it did send it to the server just didn't do anything with it, right? So let's change it over to a GET request. How can I change it over to a GET request?
In the begin form, you can change the method to get.
Okay. So form method dot get. Is that going to work? Okay. Let's look at the overloads for begin form. Okay. So in fact, I'm kind of getting it when I hover over here. You see how the overload, it's calling one, the overload that takes one input, one parameter, called route values. This is going to treat my get as a route value. It's not what I want, right? So the version of begin form, right, of all of these, notice that there's only a handful of these that take a form method, right? And it's always that third parameter. So it always needs action name, controller name, and then method. So I can't specify a method without specifying which action and controller it's going to. Does that make sense? So in order for me to do that, I need to first specify the action, which is going to be list, and the controller, which is product. Okay, so if I have that, now it's a GET request, and I can see in the URL it says Q equals hello. Okay, let's take a break at this point. We'll come back at 2 o'clock, give people a chance to stretch their legs, and we'll actually make this work.
Well, I was trying to follow along on here, but something happened. I went to an error, which might be have to do with why this thing didn't load up or something.
Probably a error.
There's something I never seen.
Because there I saw was not on your database project, it was your other project.
Never mind.
Crashed.
I did that last time. So I was just my notes and everything if you have a moment.
Solution. save all, by the way, over here, just to check.
I didn't switch it from that day that we messed with it, but
It's good. So it still crashed. I think you're running this one. Yeah, this is running as so identify this monitor number 2. It's at 1080p. Yeah.
so do I.
So we tried both of the screens on 1080p. This thing's really small though. Why is your start nav so small?
I mean, it's at the smallest, like, setting, I'm pretty sure.
So you changed the setting.
Yeah.
Okay. It just makes me think, because that's usually a sign of the resolution being really high.
It does appear in mine a little bit smaller than.
Well, those are definitely the same size, but typically it's usually a little bit bigger because of the space. I don't remember having this problem.
Yeah, this one's a little news to me. I don't remember. And it didn't pop up.
Okay, so it worked running at 1080p.
Okay.
So I just recommend keep both of your monitors on 1080p. But it says there's no changes.
Did it add image tag? Not image tag, text.
Yeah, text all. So according to that, the text all is already there.
Okay. Well, I did that this morning. See, like, whenever I went to publish it,
Okay.
that error popped up, and then
Okay.
I didn't know if it actually worked or not. But it went through, but then it crashed.
Unknown, but it looks like it may have gone through.
All right, so 1080p. Save it that way or something.
I mean, ideally, it shouldn't really change. On this monitor, it shouldn't change. It may sometimes change when you plug in this one may change. Like if you were to take it and plug it into that hub, you might switch resolutions on them. And we could try unplug it from the hub real quick and see what it does.
Kirby's a mouse. No. Same touching words.
So the resolution is like that. Okay, so it's still at 1080p. And plug the thing back in. This way, just testing. Okay, yeah, it looks like it kept it.
Nice. I'll keep that in mind, tomorrow or future days. I'll just check it. If something says a bug out, I'll just go back to that. Let it flow now. Some water.
This 4K is just not all that well supported.
Yeah.
sitting out there, it's up for grabs as much as we're trying to get rid of. So, grab as much as you want.
Mountain Dew and Pepsi.
I'm not such a big fan of soda.
That's fine. I just need to get out of the office.
There's a bunch of soda sitting out there.
Grab it. It's up for grabs. It's free.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, grab it. We've got a bunch we're trying to get rid of. There's more. I've got like 3 more boxes like that I need to get rid of. I've got like at least 3 or 4 boxes upstairs we need to get rid of. Like whole 12 packs, so. Mr. G had sucked some out this morning, and it's like I can stick some more out because most of them gone. Okay, so we put in the UI for that, for the search bar, and we switched it over to go via get instead of post. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is actually put in the logic to handle that. So one thing you might ask before I get to that, I've called this field Q. Q is kind of the standard name that we use for search boxes. It doesn't have to be Q. It can be anything you want it to be. But Q is kind of the standard name for search boxes. Yep.
Now, is there a reason when you should use a query string instead of posting data? Like, when should you and when should you not? You know?
So again, go back to, are you changing data or are you not changing data? That's typically the rule. Are you changing data or are you not changing data? Okay. The other thing to know, anytime you post data, anytime you send data to the server, if you send it via post, the browser and the web servers along the way are typically not allowed to keep that data around. Okay. If you send it via get, they're allowed to save it in their caches. They're allowed to keep that information. They're also allowed to keep that in your history, your browsing history. Whereas if you send it, so if you send it over get, they're allowed to do that. Versus if it's post, that data is kind of ephemeral. It's temporary. Right. It's not allowed to be saved. Nor is the result of that post allowed to be saved. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So if I think about search, that's not private data. It's actually a good thing if I save those search results, because there's a good chance if I'm searching for computers, somebody else is searching for computers. So I might as well save that result. That makes sense? Yep. That's what the general rule is around. That's the expectation. Okay, so I'm going to add this property in here. It's going to be a type string. I'm going to default it as null. And then I just need to add it to my where clause. Okay. Now, I already have a where clause here. Okay. I already have a where clause here. So one option is I could extend that where clause. I could incorporate it into there, right? It'd be a very long where clause, but that would be okay. What I'm going to do instead, I'm going to add a second where clause. Because this is an and, this works out. So what I want to say, though, is I want to say where the tags, right? I don't want to necessarily say where the tags is equal to that query string, right? So if I did it, this check is saying, find me the category that's exactly this, right? But when I type in a query string like this, if I'm searching by keywords, I probably don't want it to match exactly. Does that make sense? This equals equals would make it match exactly. Okay, which means I have to match the entire string. So let's just see what that looks like. So if I write it this way and run the program, notice that hello is in there. Notice that bling is in there, right? So I'm going to say bling and look for that. Notice I get no search results, right? Because it doesn't match exactly. So if I say bling, comma, gold, comma, king, then I get that result, right? Because it's matching it exactly. But I want to only match part of the tags. Does that make sense? Otherwise, it has very little value to me. Huh? I could do a contains. We just talked about how to do some of the stuff in SQL. What would I use in SQL? Just as a quick kind of refresher. Huh?
Are you trying to get like the duplicates out of there?
So let's say I just type in gold. I want this result to come in if I just type in gold.
You would use like.
I use the like keyword, right? I'd use the like keyword. In SQL, I would use the like keyword. And Eston, you're right, I need to use the contains keyword. Contains allows me to actually, it'll generate a query that has like in it. That's how I get like, is by using contains. Now, there are two different versions of contains. And this is an important thing to remember. There's two different versions of contains. They're both called contains, okay? If you can call contains on an array or a list or whatever, you're saying, is that thing exactly in that list, right? Versus if I say contains on a string, I'm saying, is that somewhere in that string? Okay, those two things work very differently. It can be hard to tell sometimes just by looking at the code to know which one that is. But it is important to keep that straight because that can easily get confusing. So I'm going to say x.tags.contains q. So if the tags contains this string q, then I'm interested in it. So if my keyword's null, just give me all the results. If I leave it blank, give me all the results. But if I do give you a search query, then only give me the ones that have that in their tags. And I need to run this. So let me go execute. So I type in gold, and I get it. Okay. If I type in, let's say, lowercase gold, I still get it. So it is, at the moment, it is case insensitive. Okay. So by default, searches like that using the like keyword are normally case insensitive. Okay. There is a way to change that, and you do want to be aware of that. So the reason that it's case insensitive is something called collation. Okay, every varchar column, every char column that you put in can have its own collation set. Okay, and that collation is either case sensitive or case insensitive. Okay, so tsql where's the two? There we go. Collation kind of looks like this. There's a bunch of different collation settings. As far as working with English, they typically start as Latin 1 general, and then there's a bunch of things at the end. Those things at the end tell it whether or not it's case sensitive or not. So CS stands for case sensitive, CI stands for case insensitive. Okay, so let's say I want to do a case in, I want to switch this over. Insensitive. So if I set the correlation to this, then it's going to be case sensitive. If it's set to the other one, which is I think CI, anyway. So if I change it to this, collate there. So I'm going to go to the database. Okay, so at the end of this column, I'm going to say collate Latin 1 general CS. I think that maybe needs to be before the null. There it is. So if I add that in there, that's now specifying the correlation. Okay. So let me publish this and just show you how this is going to work differently. Okay. Published. All right, so now I'm back here. So if I type in gold, all good. If I type in lowercase gold, no results, right? So if you need something to be case sensitive or case insensitive, that's the way to change it, is you change the correlation. Does that make sense? There unfortunately isn't a way to change that directly through link, to specify a correlation in link.
So what is the Latin 1 general?
So that's kind of the character set, right? Which actually means that this is constrained to European languages. That is what that is about. So it would be if you need to support all languages, it actually would be something different. The support for that on Microsoft side has been a little bit spotty. I think they're working on it, but we haven't gotten like a Unicode case sensitive version yet. It's all specific to a particular language.
What was case insensitive?
So switch these over. So yeah, so it'd be CI, AI. So this is case insensitive, and then this is accent insensitive, if I remember right. So that would be what you would put there if you needed it to be case sensitive. That's how you could force it. But for this purpose, I don't want that to be case sensitive, so I'm going to leave that without a correlation there, because it's going to default as case insensitive. But that's the thing to know. Anytime you have a like operator there, the correlation does come into play. Okay, so that will take care of that. Now, what if I want it also to search for that query string in the title or the description? What if I also want it to allow that keyword that I typed in to be in the title or the description? How would I change this code?
Could you add more ors to?
Yeah, I could. So I could say or x dot name dot contains q x dot back here x dot, well, go back and do it the other way. X dot description contains Q, right? So I could say, if it's null, give me all the results. Otherwise, give me results that have it in the name, or the tags, or the description.
And having multiple wheres like that, it kind of like having a compound statement with an and.
Yeah, effectively it's going to combine them as an and. So it's going to say, check this, and then also this also has to be true. So it's kind of like putting the first thing in parentheses and the second thing in parentheses and putting an and between. Effectively does the same thing. Now, an interesting thing we can do, remember that we can use this database.log to see the actual SQL that it runs. So let's do that and let's see what we get. So I'm going to run it with the debugger attached. I'm going to look for gold. And I didn't have a breakpoint in, so I need to fix that. Breakpoint and there at the end. Oh, actually I don't need to have a breakpoint in because I can just look at output. There it is. Or, yeah, I do need to really have a breakpoint in, so let's just do that. So go here, bold, look at the output. There we go. So here is the actual SQL that it ran against the server, right? So on the inside here, we can kind of see, for whatever reason, it has decided to put as two nested select statements, which we hadn't really seen yet. We'll kind of go through it. We'll start at the inside. So at the inside, we're saying select. It's telling which columns to pull out. You'll notice that all of those start with this extent 1. That's because it's renamed the products table as extent 1. Okay, so that's just part of how it generates the SQL. Is it aliases all the tables as extent 1, extent 2, etc. So we've got the products table. So we say product ID, name, description, category. So it's telling it which columns it wants to get back. And then it's also having this where clause here. So where something is null, or the category equals that thing, equals something. So I've got plink 0, which if I look down here, you can kind of see what those variables are defined as. The @ sign defines it's a variable. That defines as a variable in SQL. So the @ sign here, we've got, okay, that one is null. And then we've got plink 1, that's also null. Interesting, which that's our category variable here, right? So checking whether or not that's the category's been specified, and if the category matches, and then there's an and, you see that and combines these two things. So that and combines those two things. You can then kind of see the similar thing here. It says is null, or that's this. See, name is like yada yada.
Sorry.
Okay. So name is like that, tags is like that, descriptions like that. So you can see it's turned all those contains into likes. And you can see on the outer level now, so this is the inner select. Anytime you do a select, that generates a results table, right? That generates a results table. Well, in SQL, you can put other select statements inside of other select statements, because what am I doing here? from this. I'm treating that as another table. So I'm selecting to build this table, and then I'm selecting from that table. So this select is selecting from that nested query we have, calling it project 1. And the outside here is really all it's doing is that pagination. The only thing that it's really doing is ordering the results and doing that, give me those pages. That make sense? So that's what the SQL looks like there. That can be useful to look at sometimes just to see, hey, is it doing what is actually doing as far as the SQL is concerned, because that can have an impact on your performance. It can have an impact on what kind of outcome that you see once the query runs. Okay. So that's really all we necessarily need to do to make the search work. One thing you've probably noticed, I hope you've noticed, is that every time I run it, the search box is blank. You seen that? Every time I run it, the search box is blank. So the way I can fix that, let me go to this view model. Just like we added category in here, I'm going to add the search in here. Or maybe I'll just call it query. I'll call it query. So back to here, query is equal to Q. And go back to the view and change this so it says value is equal to model dot query. So I add it to the model, and then I use the value here to show that value for the model. So now when I search, it doesn't clear it out. Does that make sense?
Where did you add query to?
So I added it to the view model. So see at the end of the action method, I'm creating this product list view model.
Right.
So that's what I added it to. Because that product list view model is what I'm passing down to the view. I could have also passed it through ViewBag. That could work too. But I've already got a view model here, so I'm going to just add it to that view model. So that's one thing to know. Now, let's say I had more than one page. One thing I notice here with the paging, what's happening with my paging? I still have 3 pages. Why do I still have 3 pages? And notice if I go to the 3rd page, it completely forgot about my search, whatever I put in the search box. Yep.
Still getting it's still getting the number of the total item. You're still calculating through the total number of items in the category.
So I'm not incorporating that query. I'm not incorporating the search terms in the count. I'm only currently incorporating them up here. Right? So if I take that and I copy it down there, yes, I'll get the correct count. Okay. Now, before I fix that, I do want to show you one thing. So one important thing to remember with the paging is to remember we have to put certain things in that URL. Oftentimes that we're searching by. So for instance, if we look at page links, notice we've already put the category in there into each of the page links, right? So if I'm paging through search results, I also need to make sure that I have that query string, my search string, in there as well, so that the links will be correct. So I also want to make sure that not do I just have category here, I want to add in Q is equal to model dot query, right? So every time I have one of these page links, it incorporates the page number, the category, and the query string. Does that make sense? So if I look at this right now, if I don't have any search term put in, okay, it's fine. There's no query string in the URL. Once I put in my query string there, note that my links now have Q equals gold. So as I go through here, you see it's still staying in the search box. Does that make sense? That's a really, really important thing. If you don't put those, if you don't put that stuff in, if you don't put those fields that into the page links, your search will be completely useless to your end users because they need to get to page 2 and they need it to not reset their search inputs when you go to page 2. So absolutely, absolutely make sure that may seem like a minor detail. It's a really, really big deal to users to make sure that's included in the paging links. Okay, so we bring this back in. That should fix the count. Okay, we have 1 page, problem solved. So that's all I had to do. I need to have that logic both in getting the results, getting the page of results, as well as getting the total count of results. Okay. Any questions about searching still? So does that kind of make sense that there's a few different pieces to do to get that set up, but overall the individual pieces aren't necessarily that hard. I think once you do it a few times, it'll become a lot easier. I've asked you to set up a search for both of your labs, so you can get some practice with that. I think the search that I set up for your blog, I just ask you to get a single input like this, single search box that just searches everything in the blogs. And as far as the work orders go, that one I put you can see how the screen mock-up looks. There's a few more boxes and such to search by. So there's like 3 different ways to search for that one. So hopefully that'll give you enough practice with searching. At least get started with it. So we've got the tags in there. The next thing I want to look at is getting images in there. Okay. So for getting images into our database, there's again a few different options for how I can go about that. Why am I not? Why don't I have a where did my, oh, there it went. Okay. I'm trying to remember where my products class is. There it is. Okay. So as far as putting the data in for photos, I've got a similar sort of case where I can build it more than one way. Okay. So one option I can pick is I could say, let's say I have photo file name. Or I'll just leave that as photo. And this is some sort of string. Okay. So one option is I could just store the name of the file into the database, right? Store the name of the file into the database. Another option is what? I could also store the entire path to the file in the database, right? Those are two options, right? Well, what's the trade-off? What's the trade-off between storing the entire path versus just storing the file name?
If you store, well, if you store the path, then it might be different on a different system. And if you store the file name, it can be related, or yeah, related to every computer.
So, okay, so let me give three more concrete examples. So let's say one option, I could save it as king.jpg. I could store it as tilde/content/products/king. Or I could store it as C://
I'm seeing what you're talking about now.
See, this
one takes more
is a
space.
relative path, and that's an
Yeah.
absolute path.
Yeah. One takes more space than the other, I assume.
Right. Well, this one definitely takes the least space.
Yeah.
Right? If I'm concerned about space, this is definitely the shortest. Just storing the file name will always be the shortest. Because all three of these have to have the file name in them, whether I like it or not. Okay. This one, if I store it all the way down to the C drive, yeah, that's going to be specific to your computer. That's if I transfer this from one server to another, all my image links won't work because I'm storing where they are on the actual computer. If I transfer from one server to another, it probably won't be in the same place. And in fact, if I'm serving this from more than one server, it might be that different servers have them on different places.
So I guess if you change like a folder, like instead of products, and you change it later in the code, or change the folder later,
Yeah.
then it would break the path.
What do you mean, change? Which one are we talking about?
For the second one.
The
So
second
if you-
one.
So if you change, so you have that coded in the database, and then you go and later change it in your, on your computer or whatever, then
Yeah.
it will break it in the database. So.
Right, so if I store the relative path like this,
Yeah.
right, and I change the folder where I'm storing the images, so for instance, maybe I need to take the folder, maybe my server's overloaded, and I need to take all the images and actually store them over here instead, right? So that the images take up these computers and use their bandwidth, but everything else uses my web server, right? Well, then I have to go through and change all of these relative paths in the database to point to where they are actually now. However, let's say I have 3 different servers set aside, and one of them's running some of the images, the second one's running some of the images, and the third one's running some of the images. Well, if I do something like this, then I can store in the database also which server it's on. That makes sense? So that can actually be valuable. That can actually be a valuable solution. if I'm potentially needing to go across a bunch of servers and having that information stored there. This one, shortest, as long as we're all running on one server, or I have some sort of most normal setups that we do, this is actually usually ends up being best for, oh, I need to offload it to, I need to take all my images, I'm going to take them from my web server, put them over on this server. This is actually the easiest one to do it just behind the scenes and just say, oh, we did the switch. I don't have to update anything on the database side, right? And now you got all your images over here instead of getting all your images over here. Does that make sense? So any of these options are valid, but I definitely wouldn't take that one, the third one.
So like on the
As much as
plain
possible.
king.jpg, so it just knows where that it's on a specific server, so it knows just to get it from there.
So we would have to, we hard code the first part of that, because the reality is, let's say I store them in like this, notice that this part is duplicated for every single product image. At the moment, if I'm storing all my images in content products, well now every single file name in the database starts with that. So I'm just wasting a bunch of space, right? I'm just wasting a bunch of bandwidth sending that back and forth.
So,
Huh?
right. Okay, so it still has that, you're just not putting it
Right,
right.
we just need to add that in code.
Okay,
The difference is this would be in data, we would then need to put that in code.
I understand.
There's a trade-off. Sometimes this is better, sometimes that's better. I would ask as far as what we do in class, if we have one of these three options, please save it as this first one. Okay, as far as what we do in class. But know that these others are out there. There are options. So that's one way to do it. I could just save the file name. There's another option that you can pursue, and the book does talk about this in chapter 12. The other way to store that is we can store if we do that like file name, the thing I'm storing is, remember, the only thing I'm storing in the database is just the name of the file. But the actual data, the actual image data, all the pixels, is not stored in the database, right? I can actually store it in the database, and then it might look something like this. So I might say image data have that be type buffer, and then I need to know image MIME type. And this would be, let's just say varchar 100. Okay. So this is a valid way to store the image data as well.
Let's say a mime.
MIME type. M-I-M-E. Yeah. Well, meme is M-E-M-E. That's actually mime. That actually, word mime actually predates the word meme, because mime actually goes back to, it's actually originally came from email. Back in, I think it was introduced 80s or 90s, well before the term meme was coined. But anyway.
I also think it's even older, since it would refer to mute clowns.
Huh?
Like,
Oh.
Or what does it refer to? Mime.
So mime, it says what kind of file this is. Okay, so it says what kind of image this is. So specifically, like the mime type for HTML, for an HTML file, is text/HTML. CSS is text/CSS. A plain text file that ends in .txt would be text / plain. Okay.
I just never seen it before.
Yeah. So anytime actually you get a file from the internet, whenever time you direct your browser at a page, this actually comes back as part of the results, is it tells the browser what kind of file am I giving you. And that's part of why we need it. We need to tell it what kind of image are we giving it. So if I remember right, it's just image / JPEG or something like that. I need to go double check that I've got those MIME types right. So it would come back with, here's the data for the image. Oh, and by the way, it's a JPEG or it's a PNG or it's a ZIF. So that's what we're actually storing in that column. We need to know the data of the image and how it's encoded.
So you say, is that buffer, is that like bytes or something?
That buffer, yeah. So the way it translates to, what it translates to in C# is a byte array. Okay, it translates as a byte array. I do want to go through, they have an example of how to do this in the book. I do want to go through it with here to see how that works out. So the upside of that is now we're storing all the image data actually in the database. Okay? So it's all in one place, right? All my image data is all in the same place where I'm storing the rest of my data. Okay? Which might seem like a good thing, but recognize image files are kind of large, right? So now you're dealing with a large amount of data in the middle of your database. Okay, that can slow things down quite a bit. And specifically, anytime I'm running, typically when I'm running things in link, I'm getting back the entire table, right? Which means that if I'm not careful, if I just put this in the products table, anytime I ask for product, I'm pulling down the entire image for that product as well, right? So where something might have been just a few bytes long, maybe the product record is less than a kilobyte for that, I might easily get a file here now that's 100 kilobytes, right? So this can make it 100 times slower to get my data, right? So what's another option I can pursue to still have this in the database but not have it on that table?
No, never mind.
So what I can do, think about this. Can I take these two columns, move them to another table? Okay? So let's do that. So let's take those columns and move them to another table. If I do that, maybe I come down here and I say I have photos. I have a photo table. And it has image data, image, MIME, type. So I could break that off, right? And actually I may need a photo ID in here, I forgot to add. And then I can just say, okay, well, let's add a photo ID up here. Right? So I could do that. I could take my image data, throw it in another table, refer to it just by the ID that way. And now I can have product images, but I don't necessarily have to have the image data pulled back every time, right? So only if I want that image data, then I do a join. Does that make sense? I only join the data in if I actually want the images. And I can easily just get the images that I want rather than getting all the images in the database. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's explore this option. Okay. Right now, this option still only supports one photo, okay, per product. But let's try this option. So I'm going to go to the tables. I'm going to add a new table. Table photos. So in here, I'm going to have photo ID. I'm going to have the data. I'll call it image data. Image data, which is type buffer, and image MIME type, which is a varchar. Both of these things are required, so I'm going to make them not null. I might also want a name in there, so I'm going to go ahead and add an image name. So there's my basic table. I've got an ID column, and then I've got the name, the data, the MIME type in there as well. So what built-in type buffer? So what is it not like? Do I have that wrong? Oh, it's binary. Sorry, it's binary, not buffer. That's what I'm getting mistaked on. So it's type binary. So I'm going to add that table. Generate script. Create table. All good. I can go back to my models now, add a model to represent that table. So I'm going to say add class. And I'm going to say call this photo. Remember the table is plural, the name of the model class is singular. So now we need to build up this class. So I need to say public int. This is going to be the photo ID. I need to add the image name. So public string image name get set. I need public byte array. Actually, I'm going to pull both of those things from here. So I want the ID and then a name, the data, and the type of image it is. Okay, I'm going to add some attributes to this, so I want to mark this as the key. I want to add string length to this one. And I'm going to add string length to that one as well. All these are required. So required and string length, required, required. So all those I've marked up. Okay. So now that I have my model class, I also, by the way, need to remember to add it to the database, the DB context. So on the DB context, I'm going to add that in here so that it knows that there's a photos table. Okay. So create the model class, I've added it to the DB set. Now that table exists as far as any framework is concerned. Okay, and it knows the structure of that. Now, what I may want to do next is add some sort of controller to be able to manage or upload those images, right? May want to have another controller to manage those. So what would be a sensible thing to call that controller that manages the photos?
Photo controller.
You said photo controller?
Yeah.
Is that what you guys were going to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So typically I'm going to call it by the name of the model class that it's for managing. So if I want to manage photos, I'm going to call it the photo controller. So I'm going to add a new one. And actually, to make things simpler, no, never mind. I'm going to go through this run. I'm going to go through empty. So add, we're going to call this the photo controller. I need to add a reference to the database. Go ahead and format this document. So private SportsStore database okay, so I got connection to the database. I know I'm going to need an index method. Okay, and my index method I'm just going to use to display a list of all the photos. I also want a way to upload photos, right? So in order to upload photos, I'm going to add the upload action. And I'll need a get version for the blank form as well as a post version for when you send it back. So here I want to take photo, take a photo. I'm going to end up adding that to the database. Okay. So in my main page, I want to show all of the photos. So I want to go through var photos is equal to underscore db dot photos, and say to list async. Async task, do all the shindigs there using threading, using system.data.entity. There we go. There's my to list async. Okay, so grab the photos, pass them down to the view. So that's my basic index page. So it's just going to list all the photos that are in the database. Okay. So I'm going to create a view for this. So I'm going to right click on here, say add view. It's going to be the index view. I'm going to use the list model. Or no, I'm just gonna start with empty. Empty model class is a photo. And I guess I probably do want to use that admin layout for this. Yeah, so I'm going to use the admin layout for this. Oh. So, interesting error that you've seen here. Trying to generate that view. So there's an error getting the type photo. Try rebuilding a product. One thing to know, anytime you add a model class, you actually have to build and run the application before it will generate views and such. So I need to actually say build solution and then run the project. There we go. So now it's happy. Now I should be able to add the view. So add view. Photo. There we go. There it's happy. Okay. So I've got my basic view here. I want to give the user some sort of list of those photos, right? And give the user a list of those photos. I want to probably have a header to this page. I'm going to say the header is photos. I'm going to say this is admin. Let's see. What's the header on my other page? So admin index. On top of that page is all products, and this is admin all products, so I'm going to do admin all photos. Okay. And that's also an H3. Let's just duplicate that. So just do it the same way I have for that other admin page. So admin photos. In here I want to give it that list. I want to show that list of photos. I need to make sure my model is IEnumerable. IEnumerable photo. I'm probably going to have to close and reopen this. So let me go ahead and do that. Photo index. Okay.
Also getting a good time for a break soon.
Yes, it would be. It would be. You're right. Let me throw the basics of this page in, and then we'll do that. So for each, loop through the photos, var photo and model. So each of those is a photo, and I want to say show them think I'm going to show them as cards. Card, div, class, card, body. In there, in the card body, I'm going to go ahead and put the photo, I'll put the name of the image. I'm going to have a, what else might I want to have down there? I might say at photo ID. I might want to see the ID. So say ID colon image name or photo number. So that would be that first part is going to be the body, and then I want to put the image, the actual image in there. And for that, I'm just going to put a placeholder in there for now. So image source is equal to content products and bling blinking. So assuming I have a list of photos, that should give me a quick kind of look at what's their IDs, what's their name, and now I have a place to put their image. I also want to specify the alt here and the class. I'm going to say card image bottom. So I'm going to put the name on top of the card. So right now, that should give me nothing. So I don't have any photos yet, so it'll just be blank. Okay. So let's go on break here, and then we'll look at the upload, and we'll come back here and finish this up. So go on break. Come back at 3:15.
see, I was trying to keep up.
Yep.
Your table in the database,
Uh-huh.
or
The photos table?
yeah.
So it'll be on the recording, but here's the table that I defined.
Oh. A little bit.
Still read everything just fine without ever paid attention to the words in my mind.
Yeah. I don't think it's always been that way.
No difference.
There should be a knob for that. There. That's straight as I can get it.
Hey.
Okay.
It's got a
Yeah.
button, then it kind of switches like that.
But it's still turned. I don't know if there's a way.
Yeah, I don't know if it always. I don't think it was. At least I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
Published, then I created a controller, which I didn't get everything inside the task.
I said just up to this. Why do you have two index methods?
And it's how it's, well, it started and then I
Showing index method. So get rid of this. Two is the same. Two is the same.
two was that.
So this needs to be on case now. That's more work. And then you say two list. Now, you won't find it yet because you need to say, oh yeah, go to the grab that.
So there's tools.
why
You can do it, Graham.
What?
So you can do it. Yeah, great.
I suck.
In the order that you use them on?
Well, so for instance, over our kind of go together. So
But adding them at the end is usually least complex. Okay. So we've got the basics of that controller. We've got the basics of the view. One thing I might want to go do is to just add some test data. So I went ahead and did that already. I just wrote an insert statement to put stuff in there. Inserting binary is kind of weird, and you basically can't do it in SQL, or you typically don't ever do it in SQL. So what I can kind of work around, I just told it to take an empty string and turn that into binary just to get some test value in there. Obviously that's not valid image data, but it's enough to get a row in there. So now I've got 3 rows in the table, right? So if I run this now and look at what we have so far, I have something like this. So I have on the top of each of these cards, I have number 4, I have the number and then the name of it, and then and then underneath that I have the actual image, right? Now one thing you might see right away is that these images are showing up really large, right? So one tool I can use to make those a lot smaller is I can go and take these images and put them in a grid. I can put them in a bootstrap grid, so that they won't, so I can get more than one image on a row. So I'm going to say div wrap. Actually, I'll just use this. I'm going to wrap the whole thing in a div. So right click, wrap with div.
Wait, how did you just do that?
So if you select code, you can right click that code then and say wrap with div. I'll put a div tag around it. So I'm going to put a div tag around that of class row, because remember, to make the bootstrap grid work, first I need a row, and then within that I need to actually put columns. So I need to specify how many columns I want these cards to be. So I might want to say at full large screens I want these to be 6 cards per line. So I might say call and put this as, say, call 2. Won't be mobile or responsive yet, but that gives me a start. I'll go ahead and run that real quick to add some more. 1, 2, 3. So I've got a few images in there. So I've got a few images in there, and you can see it's kind of showing up as 6 images per row. So that gives me a good, decent quick preview. One thing you'll notice, the lines, I don't know if you can see them, the lines between these cards, they're right up next to each other. So I definitely want to apply some margin to keep them apart from each other. Now what happens though, let's say I put margin 2 here. Something interesting just happened to my layout. I used to have 6 cards per line. Now I only have 5. So, yep.
So now that they don't, you added margin, they're a bit bigger, and 6 don't perfectly fit in there
anymore. So I still want to get 6 to fit per row, and I still want it to fit regardless of the size of this margin. So what I'll do instead, I'll give this another wrapper here. So I'm going to say wrap the div, wrap that with a div. So on the outside, I'm going to have margin and the columns. Or actually, no, I need to have class. So on the outside, I'm just going to have the columns that I'm specifying. In the inside, I'm specifying the margin and margin too. So if I add another layer like this, where the card is inside the column instead of the card is the column, the margin works just fine. So I've got the column specified, and then inside of that, I've got the card. So that looks like this. Now you'll see that my cards become a lot smaller because now I've got double margins on the inside. Whereas before it was able to remove those double margins and collapse them, it's not able to do that anymore. So I'm going to go down to M1. So I have a smaller margin. So the other thing I probably want to do is make this mobile responsive. So if I can do that real quick, I can guess maybe at a medium point, I'm probably going to need to go down to fewer, right? So if I say maybe we're only going to get that big, we're only going to get 6 columns on a large screen or bigger. So I might say column on a large screen, it's 2 columns. On a medium screen or larger, it's maybe, let's say 4. Where's my, there it goes. So there I've got 3. I get up further and get there. So on the smallest screen size, that way I've got 1 column per row. So I'm going 6, then down to, I'm going from 6 down to 3, down to 1. So that'll help me kind of get all those images displayed. Okay. Now, one thing I need a way to actually upload an image, right? So obviously I need some sort of link to that upload page, okay? So I'm going to add that at the top of the page, div, and I'm going to say that I want this to be action link, point it to the upload page. Oh, upload null to btn. So that should give me a link, give me a button that looks like to upload things. Now I might want to align this to the right. So class deflex. Flex or reverse. There we go. So I've got my upload button over on the top right like that. Yep.
Okay, so did you explain why number 4 is doing it?
Number 4?
Yeah, why is it down like this?
Well, notice that it's got a different name than the others. So I've got test.jpg, bling.jpg, lag.jpg. So it's the only thing that's different is really the name. The name's just a little bit longer, which is why it's jumping down. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's really just the name's long enough to get it to break down like that.
I didn't know you
Huh?
explained that. I said I didn't know if you explained that or not.
Yeah. No, I didn't, but that's all it is. It's just that name is longer. Now, if I wanted all of them to jump down, right, what could I do? I could just say, well, let's put a BR there, right? If I wanted to just do that all the time. Alright, so I want to hook up this upload button. We can see that it points to photo upload if we look at the bottom left. When I click on here, we'll see that there's nothing there yet, right? So we already hooked up on the controller side. We already created this upload method, but I haven't created a view for it yet. So I'm going to go create a view for it now. So add view, we're going to call it upload. It needs to have type photo, using that layout page again. So I'm going to structure the top just like I did the other header. So I'm going to say upload photo. So upload photo is my header. And now I can start putting in the form. So HTML, we're using HTML.begin form, and I need to put in my form now. So div. So thinking about how I want to structure this, I know that I need to have a hidden field for potentially for the photo ID. So I'm going to add a hidden field for that. So hidden for photo ID. I may want to have a validation summary in there. Good things to just start with. So now I can start filling in the fields. So as far as what I have on my model, right? So what do I have on my model? I have a name, I have the data, and I have a MIME type, right? Those are the three things that I'm going to save, right? So typically, if we have a model, we're typically going to create one input box per thing that we're up, per field, per property on the object, right? Typically, okay? Now, what I'm actually going to do, though, I'm going to actually extract all three of those things in this case. Well, no, I take that back. I'm going to extract two of those things from the file that you upload, okay? So I'm going to grab the name, however, I'm going to let you go ahead and enter the name. So HTML.label label for image name. So text box for validation message for So text danger, I want to give this one type form control.
Why does it do that sometimes?
Do what? Puts in the string and
Right.
stuff like that. It's trying to kind of guess what the data types are, which overload you're using. Unfortunately, for me, it's guessing the wrong, guessing incorrectly. So I've specified form control and I've specified text danger. Highlight those. And then the next bit, oh, I mean to mark this as form group. Class, form, group. Okay. Div. Now, I need to put in my upload. So div, class, form group. Come back to that because that's a bit of, yeah, that gets interesting. So div class form group, and I'm just going to put in my my save and cancel buttons here. So I'm going to say button. This is going to be type submit. I'm going to say upload, and then I'm going to also have a link back to the other page. So html.action link, cancel, it's going to go back to the index page. At class btn class. So I'll get a green upload button and a yellow cancel button. Or maybe I should just have that gray. I'll just say secondary. Okay. So that's the basic layout, right? Those are the parts that we've kind of seen before. Okay. So we get something like this so far. Now, in your HTML class, right? Do you remember talking about the type of your inputs? Remember you've got an input tag, it's got a type. Okay. May have touched on it a little bit. So far, the only type we've really used has been type text in this course. There's another kind of type in there for your input tag called file. File is what you use to create an upload control. So if I go back here, let's say I put an input, we're going to say type is file. Okay, I'm just going to save that so we can see what it looks like. Okay, I've got more to do there. But out of the box, that's what my file upload control looks like. So I can pick a file. It looks kind of like that. Okay, so I may want to style that to make it look a little bit better. Okay, I may want to style that with some bootstrap bits. A few things I have to remember though, anytime I have an input, what's one thing I need to set so that it actually gets the server?
Never mind. I don't think what I was going to say is right.
Well, what were you going to say?
You said it needs a name.
I see. Yes, I need the name. That is the answer.
Okay.
So I need the name because otherwise it won't even be sent to the server, it'll just be ignored. So I need to say name and what did I call it? Oh, okay. ID name. Okay, I'm going to name this one image. Or maybe I'll do that with a lowercase I. So I'm going to call that image. That will mean that it gets sent to the server. Okay. Now I also want a label in there for this. So label, and this is going to be for, I want to say that this is the file image. This is the image. So I've got the image name, and here I'm going to specify the image. Now remember, for needs is in reference to an ID, right? So I do need to add an ID in here. So I'm going to say ID is equal to image as well. That way I can hook this up. Because remember, for is in reference to the ID, not in reference to the name of the input control. So I add those two parts in there. I may also want to show an error message if something goes wrong. So I might say .image, maybe say .image data. So if there's an error on the image data, I'm going to show an error. I'm going to show that error here. Might also want to show an error on if there's an error on the MIME type. So just to be safe, if there's any error with either of those two things, we'll show it here underneath the input. Okay, so let's start with that. Now, how do I receive that on this side? So when I get the image, to actually get the image data to the controller, okay, it comes in as a very special, specific type. Okay, so specifically, this is the one you need to remember. It comes in as HTTP posted file base. This is part of the magic sauce of making file uploads work. Is you need to know that when you post something from a file control, it'll come back as HTTP posted file base. That's the magic class to know. Doesn't come in as byte buffer, doesn't come in as a string, comes in as that. And that will let us do the things that we need to do with the file. Now, notice as far as this is concerned that I don't have it uploading the other two things, and I've also called them required. Actually, I probably should not mark those as required, come to think of it. Yeah. I have marked those as required. I need to actually not mark those as required, because I'm going to get into, because otherwise it's going to give me an error on the validation constraint when I come in here. So I'm going to make those not, I'm going to actually uncomment those out and not make those required. So I'm going to say if not model state if the model state's not valid, then we simply send you back to the view that we're used to. I also need to say if you didn't give me a file, then I need to send you back to the view. Okay, because that file I need you to give me a file to actually upload. So I'm going to say if the image is null, then I want to show you an error. So I'm going to say model state dot add model error. I'm going to add it to, well, let's see. So I created this upload. I'm going to add it to that image data field. Yep.
So explain why you don't want to have it required. Because I understand that you're doing this
So if I see how I'm taking the photo?
Yeah.
And because I'm taking that photo object, this would fail immediately. This would fail because it would say, oh, you've left the image data null and the image MIME type null, because I didn't give the user a field for those two things. Because I didn't give the user a way to enter those two things, they would both come in as null, and it would say, oh, your model's not valid.
Right.
So I need to get around that and just allow them to be null for that. Okay. So image file is required. If they do give me an image, then I can go through and try to do something with it. So the first thing I want to try to do with it is try to extract those parts that I need. So I want to say photo dot MIME image MIME type is equal to image. So remember, this image object here, this image variable here, is this new type HTTP posted file base. We haven't seen that yet, but it's got a bunch of useful properties. So one of those useful properties there is called content type, that actually just goes ahead and gives us the MIME type of the file that was uploaded. So just by saying image.content type, I've got the MIME type already. Done. Okay. The next piece I need is I need to actually get the data. So I'm going to say photo.image data is equal to new, and create a new byte array. I need to know how big that byte array needs to be. So for our purposes, it's going to be image dot content length. Content length is how big is the file that you just uploaded. Okay. So what kind of MIME type is the file that you uploaded? How big is it? And then once we set those things up, note that at this point, I've created the array, but all of the values in that array are 0. Everything in that array is 0. I haven't actually put the data in there yet. Okay. So to get the data, I need to say image dot input stream and tell it to read the data into that array. So to read it, it needs the byte array that it's going to read it into. It needs to know where it's going to read it into and how many bytes it's going to read. So I'm going to say, for this, I need to say image dot, or no, photo. Sorry. Photo.image data. So that's the buffer that it's going to read into. It's going to read in at the start. So I'm going to say 0. And I want it to read in the entire image. So I'm going to say image dot content length. So what that will do is read in all the image data and put it into that byte array, which was, before this, it was zeros, and now it should all be filled in. Okay. once I've done all that, I now should have all the data that I need to be able to save it. So let's go db.photos.add. So we're going to add this photo that we just created, and then I'm going to save the changes. I'm going to switch this all over to asynchronous, so I can save that asynchronously. So I'm loading in the content type, I'm loading in the image data, and then finally I add it to the database. Okay. Now, this is still telling me, this is still red. Not all code paths return a value, because in that else case, I've saved it, I haven't returned from there. So on that side, I need to redirect, and I want to redirect the user back to the index page. So I'm going to say redirect action, and that's going to take the user back to the list of images. So index, redirect action index. Okay. So testing this out, we're going to see an interesting thing because I forgot to do one important step in here. So I'm going to go to /photo. Oh, /photo/index. There we go. /photo/index. I'm going to go to upload. I'm going to choose one of these files. And we're going to give this a name as test. Yes?
So it'll automatically know what the meme type is?
It will.
Interesting.
It will. And actually, let me pick an image. Let me pick a PDF file here instead. So we're going to say upload. Photo ID field is required. Well, that's interesting. Why would that be?
Maybe you inspect element to see if the hidden field has a value.
But why was it? Oh, let me do this. Int question mark on the model. Okay, there it goes. So I'm now having this error. Image file is required, right? See that? Image file is required. So if you remember what I put in here a minute ago in the controller, image file is required. So somehow it's getting in there. See that? Because there's one important step that I kind of skipped over because I just wanted to show you what happens if you forget it. So if I look here, I'm going to run this with the debugger. So we can see it getting there. Oh, I already have a breakpoint in here, so I need to remove that. Okay, so photo, upload. There we go. Okay, so if I pick here, I pick a file. So obviously I've picked a file, right? Obviously I've picked a file. Let me hit upload here. And look here. Image is null. I did pick a file on the form. But when I upload it, it's saying that the image is null. Okay, so there's two important pieces that you need to remember anytime you're uploading a file. Okay, so the first one that we looked at is it needs to come in as HTTP posted file base. I've called this variable image. Why? I called this variable image because that is the name of this input here, right? So if I'd called it website or whatever file, if I call it website, then I would need to call the variable website. If I called the variable file, I'd need to call it file. So it's simply called image because that's the name of the input. Okay. Now, in order to actually upload files in a browser, and this part doesn't matter what technology you're using, whether you're using PHP or whether you're using ASP.NET or whether you're using Ruby, it doesn't matter what's on the back end. There's something you have to do in the HTML on the front end to actually be able to upload files. Okay. Without this, the file input doesn't actually work at all. It doesn't upload any files. So, in order to do that, in the HTML, you need to set a property called enc type, and it needs to be set to specifically multi-part / form data. So that's going to go onto your form tag. And again, that's true regardless of whether or not you're using ASP.NET or something else. Okay. So that's a step that you have to remember. Now, how do we set that? Right? So we want to set that on the form tag. But how do we set that on the form tag?
Would you do it manually, or like actually put in the form tag?
I could. I don't have to, actually. So I can actually set it through here. Do you remember that there's a way to set additional HTML attributes? There's one overload that takes them. So there is an overload that does take, that lets us set additional HTML attributes. Okay, but I have to specify some other things because the only version that takes 4 arguments. So the first thing I have to put in here is the action name that I want to post it back to, which is going to be what? What action am I posting back to? Posting back to upload. Right? If I look here, this method here is called upload. So I'm posting back to upload. This is on the photo controller. I want form method post. And now I can finally specify what I need to specify. So I can say new. This is where I can specify my HTML attributes. So I'm going to say enc type is equal to that. So just a little background there. enc stands for encoding. So this is telling it how is it going to encode the data that it sends to the server. And this right here looks very similar to something I talked about a minute ago, right? With that slash in between. So this is a MIME type. So we're getting a MIME type to tell it how to upload it. So we're telling it to upload as multi-part / form data. So that's what's needed in order to actually be able to upload files. Okay. If I don't have that, any file I try to upload will just come in as null. Okay. That's an easy thing to forget. Anytime you're uploading files, this is probably the hardest thing to remember to do. Because it's just kind of like, oh, by the way, I need to do this. But that's where I would suggest just make a note of it, write it down, put it in your checklist of things to do, because it's something that easily can be forgotten. Okay. So I'm going to run this now that I've added that. Yep.
Did you say that enc type attribute was part of begin form, or is that just like you can create any type of attribute?
So in begin form, I'm down through this example. You see, if you look at there, this HTML attributes. Once I get to this HTML attributes, I can specify any HTML thing I need.
Is it part of the HTML attributes, or is it
HTML attributes is anonymous. Like there's if you look at it, it just takes type object. This is an anonymously created object. I just created this object here. So there's no like master list of everything that you can put in HTML attributes.
Okay.
It just takes where we have and spits it out. So I'm going to say upload. Okay. Now this is interesting. String or binary data would be terminated, would be truncated. Okay. So, what is too long that it can't be put in there? Let's go in here. Run that with the debugger. I would think that 100 characters would be enough, but maybe it isn't. So, okay, so my MIME type is application/PDF. My, let's see, my image name is test. My image data is, well, it's decently large. So maybe I need an actual image.
So could you like somehow like check if that size is over the limit and then do something?
I probably would need to check that the content length is over some given size. Let me see, I think on desktop I have didn't I copy down my photos? There we go. So there's an image. Upload. What does it say now? So image data. So 70,000 bytes. Let's see if it likes that. That's interesting. Please review the stack trace for more information about the error. So what is being truncated? Let me just check the data types here. So I created this photos table. Binary should be able to take any length. And I definitely don't have an image name that's longer than 100 characters or a var card that's longer than 100 characters. So why is it not working here, but it worked over on the other end? What am I missing? Because I know I had this working on the SportsStore from the book.
So does it automatically, I don't know how to say that word, truncate?
Yeah, it can immediately. Sometimes, so sometimes if you put in, let's say you put in a varchar or a car, and it's longer than what's allowed, sometimes it will automatically truncate it and just keep the part that it can. That's not a hard and fast rule as to, I've seen it kind of do both. String of binary data would be truncated still. And I know I tested this beforehand, and I don't know why. Why am I getting it now? Oh. Duh. So I have the wrong type.
The var binary?
Yeah, I think that's what I need.
Oh, so it's fixed. It's a fixed line.
Yeah, okay. I must have used a different type then when I set this up. I don't remember what I did then. So I need to be var binary, and I need to tell it how big it can be. So I want it to be var binary max. That's what I'm going to do. So going back to this table, I just need to be var binary max.
Should those still be null?
Yeah, I'm going to leave them nullable on the database side, at least for now. Okay. And of course I picked an image that was already there. So I need to pick one that's not there. Or, oh, C3. Okay, so it uploaded it. There's my number 16 yummy. But notice that I'm not seeing the image data yet because I've hooked it up to actually show the image yet. Does that make sense? So right now it's just that hard-coded image that I told it to show. So let's get it to actually show the image. Yep.
So for that, all you did was change stuff on the database side, right?
So on the database side, yeah, the whole problem was on the database side. I just needed to change it to be, to be var binary, to be the image data needed to be var binary max.
So nothing to change on the model?
No, nothing had to change on the model. So back to my photo controller. So the first thing I need to do is actually add another action method. So I'm going to call this one public action result. I'm going to call this get image int photo ID. So the idea is that this is going to take that photo ID and turn it into the actual image file. So the first thing I need to do is actually get the image. So I'm going to say var photo is equal to db.photos.single or default. Actually, I want to do that asynchronously. .single or default async. And this is going to be x dot photo ID is equal to there we go. So the whole point there is I want to get the photo with the given ID, which is really just going to run a simple select query and say select where photo ID is equal to yada yada. Okay. So now if I get a photo back, if photo is not null, then I need to return that to the user. So I'm going to say return file. And I'm going to say photo.image data photo.image MIME type. Otherwise, we return null. So just like we've seen view before, remember view will go ahead and render a view from your model. There's this file method that gives us a file content result. That's what we end up getting out of this. We get a file content result. Just like we would kind of get a view result out of view, we get a file content result here. Does that make sense? So this ends up returning that data, and it tells the browser what MIME type it is, so we can look at that. Okay, so let's run this real quick, and I kind of show you what we get from that. So remember, we've already uploaded an image, and it's ID 16, right? So I'm going to say photo/get_image, and then I'm going to say question mark photo ID is equal to 16. There's the image from the database. So if you give it that URL, it can now get to it. If I go to some of these other ones, let me try to go to 15, there's 15. If I try to go to 14, well, that one doesn't work because that was that test data that I put in there. So all I need to do now is update my source to grab this URL, to point to that URL. Does that make sense? All I need to update is the source of the image tag to point to that. So go back to photo index. I'm going to change that view now. So going to photo index. Here, instead of hard coding that URL, I'm going to say at URL.action, and that's going to point to the get image action of the photo controller. And I need to pass in what the ID of the image is, right? So it's expecting photo ID. So I'm going to say photo ID is equal to photo dot photo ID. So changing the URL to that. Remember, URL action is how I build a URL to an actual action. Remember, that's different than HTML.action. HTML.action renders is that child action will render entire action there. I need to use URL.action. Let's refresh that. There we go. So the two that are valid. Let me go to the database. Let's go ahead and just delete all the photos so that I'm not having invalid data in there. And now I can upload some of these. So I'm going to say open that. So you can see how that's working. Okay. So this, in fact, as far as the code that we have written here on the controller, notice this really doesn't necessarily only work with images, right? So I could actually use the same code to upload a file of any type. I could upload a spreadsheet that way. I could upload anything. Right? Does that make sense? I can actually use that to do any sort of file upload I want. And it's not limiting it to just be images, right? So in reality, I probably, if I was going to do this, if I was going to flesh this out more, I probably would want to check that content type and make sure it's actually an image type, right? I probably would want to make sure that it's only JPEG, GIF, or PNG, because I don't really want any other types uploaded. So I could wrap an if in there, throw an error on that if that's the case, but I'm going to leave that as is so we can get to the other part. Okay, so we got photos now, but those product photos aren't really associated with an image. Aren't really associated with products yet. Does that make sense? So we don't really have an association between products and photos yet. So I'm going to go the way I'm going to, so the first cut of that, well, let's just say every product can have a single photo. So I'm going to go into the products table and I'm going to add a photo ID. And I'm going to make that optional. So I'm going to mark that as allowing null. I'm going to add a foreign key. Which is this photo ID. References the photos table. Okay. So I'm going to hook those two things together. And what I may want to also do, oh sorry, well that's what I want to do on the database side, so that's all I need to do here. So I'm going to publish that. Okay, so I've made a change to the products table, so I need to go update that on the product model. So at the end of this, I'm going to add public int photo ID. Now I need to remember to make that nullable as such because they may or may not have a product photo, right? So some products might initially, especially now, none of the products have a photo. I need to make sure I allow them not to have a photo. Okay. So that's my photo ID. Let's go to okay, so I made that change to the model. I need to now go to the product summary. So product summary, we're going to update that view to add that image. So on the top of that, top of the card, I'm going to add an image tag. And this is going to be class card image top. And this will also be, I need to tell it the source, and I need to tell it the alt. So the alt I don't want to specify here. So just like I specified the source over there on the product, on the photos index page, I need to kind of specify it here. So I'm going to say URL.action again. And I'm going to specify that it's going over to the get image action of the photo controller and pass in the photo ID. So I'm going to say new photo ID is equal to model dot photo ID. Now, one thing to remember, as I said earlier, some of these won't have images, so I'm going to wrap that whole thing in an if. Actually, this needs to be outside of card body. Let me put that up there. So I'm going to say if the model dot photo so if there is an ID there, then we'll show it. Okay.
So it's not a card image anymore?
So it's what?
Is it not a card image anymore?
You said a cart?
Oh wait, never mind. You got a card
Yeah.
image top.
Yeah, I've got card image top there. So we're going to save that. I'm going to go back to the main page. Oh, I haven't run it yet. Number 16 or 17. Okay. There we go. So back to the main page. None of these have images yet. If I go to the database for now and add one in there, looks like I closed Management Studio. And see what it looks like. So databases, SportsStore, tables, edit the products table. And I'm going to go down to the Bling Bling King and say that he's photo ID 17. There we go. So there's his image. If I want to add in, I think what did I have on there? I think I have 18 is flag, 19 is chessboard. So, okay, 18 flag. 19 is chessboard. So similar kind of thing here, you'll see that they're big, so I'd also need to follow that same technique and put them on rows, which I can do kind of quickly here. Going to the product list, put them on a row. Nope. Wrap this whole thing in a div as well. Oh wait, I'm wrapping the wrong thing in a div. I need to wrap the for each loop in a div. I wrap this in a div. Wrap a div. Wrap a div. So this one's going to be class row. This would be class call large, maybe large 4, so call large 3, call need 6. Probably have a few too many on a row. So try call large 6. Okay, that's good enough. So I have my images there and they're showing up. But I haven't hooked up a way yet, right? I went and added that image manually on the database side. I need to kind of have a way to do that on the admin side. So if I go to admin right now, let's say I try to edit Kayak, I can't actually change the product image yet, right? So what I might want to do, one thing I might want to do is have a drop down there. Okay, so if I go to admin edit, actually let me go to the controller first. So on edit, I want to be able to show a drop down of all the images that are available. Okay, so the way I need to set that up is first on the controller side, I need to be able to load that list of images. Okay, so I'm going to add a method there, private void populate image drop or photo drop down. I'm going to say viewBag dot, oh, I do need this to be, I do want this to be asynchronous, async task viewBag dot photo ID is equal to await db dot photos dot toList async. So we're kind of out of time today, and we'll finish that up tomorrow. Because I do want to put that drop down in there. The big thing I want to really get to is talking about really what happens when we have more than one image on there. for what happens when we have more than one photo per product. So we'll have to resume with that tomorrow. But we're pretty close.